Imagine going all in, putting all your chips on red.
Mm.
But instead of roulette, it's a whole country betting their future. That's El Salvador, ditching the US dollar to take on, well, the giants of global finance with Bitcoin. But why?
What's captivating is that they're challenging the established order, questioning the very rules of the game.
So before we get to their Bitcoin gamble, we gotta lay some groundwork. What are these rules and who made them?
Let's start with the heavyweights, central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve. They're kind of like the referees of a country's economy, setting interest rates, controlling the money supply.
Right, but how do they actually control how much money's out there? It's not like they just print more when they feel like it. Or do they?
Not literally, no. But they can essentially create money through this process called deficit spending. Imagine the government needs money, right, to fund a project, whatever. They issue bonds like IOUs with interest.
Okay.
Now, the central bank can buy these bonds, even if nobody else wants them, effectively lending the government money it doesn't actually have.
So they're adding more money to the system.
Mm.
That sounds a bit like, I don't know, cheating almost.
It's not necessarily cheating, but it can be problematic. Done responsibly, deficit spending can stimulate a sluggish economy, right? But when it's excessive, unsustainable, it leads to what our article calls a stealth tax.
Stealth tax, like is that in the tax code somewhere?
Not exactly. Basically, the value of your money decreases because there's just more of it floating around. Your savings might stay the same, but everything costs more.
So it's like central banks silently taking a cut from everyone's wallet.
Precisely. And this ability to just influence the value of money, to print more at will, it's a major point of contention for those who think central banks have too much power.
And this is where the IMF enters the picture, the International Monetary Fund. They're like the global lender of last resort, yeah.
You got it. Originally, the IMF, along with the World Bank, they were created with good intentions, like helping war-torn economies after World War II. But their roles have evolved, let's say.
Our article compared them to loan sharks, which is pretty harsh.
The comparison highlights the criticisms, especially towards the IMF. They often attach strict conditions to their loans, demanding economic reforms that some argue are more harmful than helpful.
So instead of a helping hand, it's more like, do it our way or else.
Exactly. They'd argue these reforms are necessary for stability, but critics say they prioritize exports to wealthy nations over the needs of the local population.
Okay, so we've got these global financial giants potentially pulling strings. But is there like a real-world example of this, something relatable for someone listening?
Absolutely. Our article highlights Bangladesh. They were encouraged to convert protective mangrove forests into shrimp farms for export, fulfilling that demand for seafood in wealthier nations.
Shrimp farming. Sounds harmless enough on the surface.
But those mangroves served a vital purpose. Natural barrier against cyclones, sustained local communities. Removing them made Bangladesh more vulnerable to disasters, harmed livelihoods.
So even with what might be good intentions, the impact can be rough. This system, with its potential downsides, unintended consequences. This is what El Salvador decided to challenge, with Bitcoin of all things. Now that's where things get really interesting. So we've seen how some view the system as flawed, El Salvador's response. Well, they went all in on Bitcoin, this digital currency that operates completely outside the control of any central bank or institution. And that's where their motivation becomes crystal clear. They wanted an escape hatch, a way to break free from a system they saw as rigged against them, where their financial fate was tied to decisions made thousands of miles away. So Bitcoin was their declaration of independence. Precisely. Bitcoin is decentralized, right? No single entity controls it. A huge draw for a country looking to chart its own course.
But let's be real, the IMF wasn't exactly throwing a Bitcoin-themed party to celebrate. That's an understatement. They issued warnings, urged El Salvador to back down, their main worry: financial instability.
Makes sense.
They said using a volatile cryptocurrency as legal tender. I mean, imagine buying groceries with something that fluctuates so much.
Paying your taxes with Bitcoin.
Could be disastrous for their economy, they argued.
And El Salvador's response to these warnings.
They basically doubled down, said adopting Bitcoin would attract foreign investment, especially in tech.
Interesting.
And they highlighted the potential to bank the unbanked, give more citizens access to financial services, plus reduce their reliance on the U.S. dollar, give them more financial breathing room.
Okay, so two very different sides to this grand experiment.
Yeah.
But did El Salvador have any evidence to back up their claims, or was this a pure leap of faith?
This is where it gets even more interesting. Despite the warnings, El Salvador made some power moves. They started repurchasing their own government bonds.
Remind me, why is that significant?
It usually means a strong financial position. Think of it like if you owed someone money and you could suddenly pay them back early,
Yeah.
means you're doing pretty well, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
By repurchasing their bonds, El Salvador seemed to be contradicting those predictions of economic doom.
They were putting their money where their mouth was.
Exactly. Now, will this gamble work in the long run? Who knows? It's high stakes for sure. But what's undeniable is that El Salvador is making the world pay attention. They've started a global conversation about the future of money, about alternatives, and that's what makes this so captivating.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Central banks, the IMF, El Salvador diving headfirst into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's a lot. But this story, it's bigger than just one country, one cryptocurrency, don't you think?
Absolutely. El Salvador is like a preview, a glimpse into what could happen if the balance of power in global finance actually shifts.
So let's zoom out a bit. What happens if El Salvador's gamble actually works? What are the ripple effects?
One fascinating possibility, a domino effect. Other nations, especially those who feel stuck under the current system, they see El Salvador, maybe their economy stabilizes, even thrives. It could encourage others to follow suit.
Instead of the US dollar being king, we could see multiple currencies battling it out, Bitcoin leading the charge.
Exactly. And then the question becomes, what happens to the IMF then? Would they have to embrace this decentralization or risk becoming irrelevant?
It's like El Salvador threw a wrench in the gears, and now everyone's watching to see if it explodes or, I don't know, revolutionizes everything.
It's uncertainty and opportunity all at once. And it goes beyond governments and institutions, too. Think about individuals.
You mean like, will I be buying my coffee with Bitcoin anytime soon?
Maybe, maybe not. But think bigger. Financial access, autonomy. What if more people could participate in the global economy, even without banks? What if we all had more control over our own financial data, our own decisions?
Almost like a philosophical debate now. What even is money? What is power in the 21st century? Big questions.
And that's why this is so fascinating. We're watching it play out in real time.
So for our listeners, anyone feeling overwhelmed, maybe a little inspired, what's the one thing you want them to take away from all this?
Win or lose, El Salvador showed us the cracks in the system. They started a conversation about alternatives, the future of money. It could be a lot more decentralized, a lot more interesting than we ever thought possible.
A brave new world out there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
El Salvador took the leap. Will the rest of us follow? Something to think about as we navigate this wild world of finance. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.